Greetings, Booktopia. Null here. Now, I wanted to look back on my 2019 reading, and it is just kind of a look back and picking out categories of things and giving you some highlights and lowlights in some cases. So I read 224 books in 2019, so there's a very good possibility that there's a better answer for some of these questions that I've come up with, but it's not happening. So without further ado, for nonfiction, some of the best that I read was Up from Slavery, which was Booker T. Washington's autobiography, and I thought it was really unique to see his perspective on things as time was changing and his views on his own community. Of course, I have a very big soft spot for My Own Words by the notorious RBJ. Sorry about that, Ruth. And it was really great to see her personal insight because Supreme Court justices supposedly are supposed to kind of keep their personal thoughts and politics separate from their decisions, but you can really see her influences, and that was really great for me in my own geekish way. I also really appreciated Unstrung, which was a book about a woman reflecting on the very famous loss of her very notable violin and her relationship with music, and how none of that ever came off as cliche or cheesy or any of that sort. My least favorite nonfiction is Foxcatcher, and that's really not the book's problem. It was more of a publishing advertising issue in that I thought it was going to be this story about a man dealing with the trial over his brother's death, but it was really a boxing story, which was nice and unique, but it wasn't what I signed up for, and so I was a little bit mean to it, I think, in my listening experience. For my favorite classics, I have to give a shout out to Beloved by Toni Morrison, and I think this is more of a modern classic, of course, and but it really packed a punch, and I really enjoyed it, and that's something I really want to go back to. I'm going to be honest, my favorite classic, and this is sort of stretching the term classic, but it is for the genre, and that is The Haunting of Hill House, which I fell head over heels for, and I am so happy that I went into it. I'm not sure what this says about my mental health, and it's going to be even worse for a later question, but we'll get there. My least favorite classic read was The Sun Also Rises. I'm sorry, Hemingway fans. I had my issue with this story is the same issues I have with Gatsby. It was more of a character issue in that I appreciate the work, but the characters just got under my skin. I'm sorry. Now, I want to look at family representation, and the absolute winner for this was the Track series by Jason Reynolds. And this was a series of 4 books, and any one of them could really be picked out for this. But over the course, it was amazing to see. I don't think I've ever seen a book where you have a character that was, or 2 characters in this case, that were adopted by a family member, but a blood parent was still involved in their life, and to see and embraced and loved by all parties around. It was a case of, this was just the best solution for our family because I'm incapable of giving you what you need right now. And I don't think I've ever seen that in a book like this. And there's also an element of found family because it is about a team of kids. I think they're in middle school who are brought together by a track professor trying to give a track coach trying to give them a little more than what their community offers to them and bring out the best in them. And there's just so much. This is just a spectacular series. I can only imagine what it means to a kid coming across this at the right time in their lives. The worst representation of parenting in this years of reading, A Perfect Fraud. It highlights what I think is one of the most harmful and egregious parenting styles that exist in our world, shy of straight up abuse, and in some cases it might even be abuse, but I don't want to say any more than anything about this book because it will spoil some things later on. But it churned my stomach. Kudos to the writer because it really got under my skin, and so good writing, but it just hit too close to home to certain people I know. Then For the best narration, now, honestly, I could do a whole video rambling on about narrators. I love performance, I love voice acting. Just to go briefly, the track series that I just mentioned, it has two narrators. One does three of the books, one does one of them, and it brought a life and an energy that I don't think I would have enjoyed this series as much as I did if it wasn't for them. I also really loved The Poet X. If we haven't heard enough about it, I think that's something that is meant to be read out loud. It really is. Also, Neil Gaiman's Ocean at the End of the Lane. Anything he does, that man is a born performer. Some authors are just made to do their own work. I have also found a multicast recording of Dracula, which is to die for. I think that's going to be the version I revisit from now on because I try to read that every year. And the Lock and Key graphic novel series has an audiobook. It is a star-studded cast. It was fabulous. It also had sound effects, so it was a whole performance. It was definitely one of the best experiences. One of my worst experiences, and I'm really sorry to say this, but Please Don't Go Before I Get Better, which is another set of autobiographical poems that is read by the writer. And this isn't to speak about the quality of the poems, although it is a work I really didn't connect with. And she might be wonderful live, but in a recorded format, it fell really flat. I wasn't getting any emotion from it whatsoever. And if you're going to speak poetry, you need to have the performance aspect, in my humble opinion. So, as far as the quality of the writing itself, I'll let you be your judge of that, but it was something that probably wasn't best as an audiobook. The work that stuck with me the longest was Blood, Water, Paint. It is just short novella that is split into, uh, it's a little metaphysical of sorts. I'm not even sure if that'd be the right term for it, but it is a woman relating her current experiences. She was a very famous painter in during the Renaissance, and she's my favorite. And it's about her dealing with the personal woes and experiences that she has, and relating them to these stories of the painting she's telling and the stories of her own mother. And it just hit a core, and I think about that really frequently. Um, One that didn't stick with me was Capture, and because I was looking through my list of books that I wrote down, and I'm like, well, wait, what was this? And it was actually the first book in a series, and it just didn't work. The most disappointing work I had this year was probably The Secret History of Wonder Woman by Jill Lepore, and that's only because I fell so much in love for these truths last year that I think I expected too much. Also, I'm really sad to say that I can appreciate what Dune does, but I think I have one more book left in that series for at least the ones he wrote, and I'm not loving it. I love some of the concepts, but I'm just not loving it. Same thing, and this hurts me even more to say, is The Wheel of Time. I appreciate it so far. I enjoy parts of it, but maybe just because I'm reading so much of it so quickly, I'm just not. I was wishing I would really fall in love with this, and I'm not. And also the remaking in The Seven Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which are going to come up again, but I think that's mostly to do with how it was ending, because those are two books that I absolutely loved the concepts for, and I was with it all the way up to the end. My most pleasant surprise of the year, I only really reach for romance novels when I'm trying to do a quick fill for a challenge or something of that regard. So the best surprises I had were actually in the romance category. Two books which are probably some of my top favorites now, and that is Ask Tell and Ask Me Again, which are two military romances. It's a duology, which is a female-female romance. And the second book addresses the concept of PTSD in a way, and just so completely, not just in an individual level, but how it affects family and friends, that I don't think I've ever seen done. And I was just astounded. I actually loved it more than the first. And the first one is great because, okay, there's no cheating at all. As far as the main characters, there's none of these really terrible, harmful tropes. It's such a healthy written romance. I was just shocked, because anyone who reads romance and looks for any sort of LGBT rep in any books knows that a lot of them are not written by people. They're not an own voices work, if you will, or at least they weren't traditionally. And so there are a lot of traps that they fall to just for the sake of moving a story along, and this avoided it, and it was great and wonderful. And the second one from the genre, the romance genre that I really loved was I Wished for You, which I went in for a prompt fill, and I thought it was going to be just a cheesy male romance. But this actually ended up dealing with issues of polygamy and partnerships and evolving friendships. And yes, it did not handle things with as much grace as the Astel series, but I was really surprised because you don't hear any sort of multiple person relationship handled in any way that just doesn't feel either like a trope or shaming. And I think the more we normalize different relationship structures, the less hate there is going to be in this world. A book I should have DNF'd. Again, it was a quick prompt fill, and that is the Sadist Bible, and I don't even want to acknowledge that this exists, so we're moving on right now. A book that deserved a second chance, I think, is Garden of the Evening Mists, which was a book that dealt with a former um, prisoner of the Japanese militia army section during World War II. She was Korean, and it's about her and an exile from Japan dealing with the after effects of World War II. And this is something that I feel like I should have loved more. I feel like I'm missing something, and I really want to revisit that and see what it was. Maybe it was another conclusion thing. Maybe it was just me, but that deserves another try for me, I think. The most satisfying conclusion. Now, I'm not as in love with the Raven cycle as a lot of people are, but I did think that the ending fit. I finally got to the Raven King, and I thought that was pieced together really well. I also thought that the Duke's Children, as shocking and infuriating as like the first opening paragraph as that series is, it pulled things together well, and I really appreciated how that came together. Uh, Least satisfying, we're going back to Seven and a Half Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and also a book I read early in the year called Hitman Anders and the Meaning of It All, I think. That was really, I kept waiting for it to come together, and it never did, which is a shame because it had a really unique writing voice in the writing, and it had a really unique concept, and it just kind of fell apart. And I'm not going to go into full summaries because this is getting really long. Now, something I took from a reread, I revisited the books, the Roswell High series, which are the two TV series were based upon. I first read them in middle school, and so I just wanted to see how they held up. And I was actually really shocked about how many topics that were really heavy hitting that they never really developed fully, because back in the day, YA was not treated in the same way it is now, and it was very much Sunday school special, or after school special rather, lighthearted lesson of the day type deal. And this dealt, especially when it came to like the foster care system and abuse and trauma, and even issues of being a prisoner. And it had a lot of issues that I really wish it was written today to see how it would be handled. Also, the Scorpio races held up just as much as it did last year. That is definitely going on the reread every year list. And again, on the yearly reread, I think, list has to be Codename Verity. It's one of the few books that have ever made me cry. And I read it again this year for the first time, almost to the date. And this time I read it physically the first time. It was sent to me by a good friend, and I listened to it the second time around. And I held it together during my lesson, and I thought it was great. I made it, got me a little choked up, but we were good. I got in the car next morning to go to work, and a song came on the radio that had a line that was very similar to a key line in the book, and I almost lost it. So, yeah, there was that. A book I appreciated but didn't like. Again, Wheel of Time. I really appreciate it, but I'm not loving it as much as I would. I understand the significance of the Origin of Species by Darwin, but that was a hard one, and if it wasn't a Steve challenge, I probably wouldn't have gone there. Also, it was remarkable, and it was a personal autobiography called I Am Najude, age 10 in a divorce, and it was about a young girl from the Middle East who filed for a divorce from her arranged marriage, and won her case. It was a remarkable, but being such a young author, it didn't have the same tightness or maybe narrative fluidity that some others might be. Now, a character I related to and a character I didn't relate to. The character I related to the most, and we're not going to dive into this too much because I'm afraid to, but one of the reasons I loved A Haunting of Hill House so much was that there was something in Eleanor's demeanor that just clicked instantly and hit way harder than it should. It was just one of those right time, right moment things. And I think that if I hadn't sewn into Eleanor so tightly that the group of investigators, experimenters, visitors, guests, whatever you want to call them in this book would have even seemed as pretentious to me as people like in The Great Gatsby and The Sun Also Rises does, but something just worked for me in this. A character I did not relate to, the lead detective in, I don't know what Robert Parker's the author. I don't know what the series is called because I would know the name of the detective then, but I read Widow's Walk, I think it was, which was given to me by the sweetest old lady, so it breaks my heart. But this is probably the first time I've really got the dude bro crime protagonist issue from that just did not go with me whatsoever. And also the girl from Who, What, When, Where, Die. It was one of my lowest rated the books of the year, but you would think that I would totally be there for the Star Wars geek journalist. But at the same time, she was almost, there was a lot of contradictory things that she said about fandom and fans, and that just did not go well with me. And I'm just, nope, nope, nope. Something that made me care about something I don't. And this is going to be a little bit sad to say, but again, Codename Verity, and you'll only hear about that one more time in this, I promise, which is good because we're almost wrapping up. Um, I don't know what it is. I don't connect with France. I have nothing against France, but when it comes to French history or anything placed there, I really have to struggle. Like, it took me forever to convince myself to read Three Musketeers, which I did end up enjoying. And the same thing, I love the Phantom of the Opera musical, and it took me years to actually read the book. And I like, Hunchback of Notre Dame, but there are certain things like Les Mis that is going to take me a long time to get to because of the length and that. And also, Feed by Mira Grant. She made me care about zombies. I have nothing against zombies. They just, of all the monsters out there, they're probably the ones I feel meh about. I just don't really have a strong opinion either way, but I really cared about this world, and it was a zombie world. So there's that. Now, um, a book I want to be made into a TV series, a movie, and an anime. Yes, this gets three because they all have their strengths. Now, I will say that I would say the Wayward Children series or Lock and Key, but both of those have been optioned. One is actually certifiably being made, which is Lock and Key. Wayward Children, I think, was just optioned. I don't think anything's come of that yet, but I'm really excited and hope that goes through. For TV, for a mini series, I think that the priority of The Orange Tree, which was probably a more disappointing read for me, that I wish it was a little more concise. I think that a lot of its pitfalls could have been solved or could be solved by a miniseries. It might be able to flesh out some of the weak points in it. And also, I think the remaking could make a really good series if it's not too beyond the sort of crime, mystery, supernatural fad yet. Given the right network, I think it could flourish there. It's also a little bit meta for it, which would kind of work well, I think, within the audience. For a movie, when I reread Codename Verity, I pretty much was plotting out how I would have the opening scene to this, and so I wouldn't kill to see it made, but I would really love for it to be made. Also, I'm not sure how well it would do, but I read a book by I don't know if she's a Maine author or a New Brunswick author, but it was Steal Away, and this was about a private investigator, and it takes place mostly in New Brunswick, Maine, and I want to say Massachusetts. I can't remember where the preacher is from that contacts her about his wife, but I think it has a strong female detective mystery, and anything that can kind of give my local area some kudos is good by me. Now, for an anime, I think that there are two options here, and I think that the Other Lands would be really great, especially if Satellite or Madhouse in its glory days could get a hold of it. I think a lot of the character types would lend itself really well to the format. Also, while it has Korean influences, The Dragon Pearl is a sci fi story that was really great and I think could tap into a lot of uh, niche genre fans. And I think that if Gino or Mappa could get that project, it would just be mind blowing. So I know this is really long. I want to thank you for coming along with me. And if you have anything of these topics, these categories that you think fit well, please share with me because I would love to hear them. Toodles!